what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, the 17th of October. Thank goodness. I'm sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. It's been a very busy news day. We've got a lot to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. That's 800-313-9443. Mike is sitting in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and opinions, of which I'm sure you're going to have quite a few today. Sad news. The flags are at half-mast here. Representative Elijah Cummings has passed away. He'd been having serious health problems for a long time. And he basically died in what is politely called hospice care. But he was a key figure in this impeachment inquiry into Trump as chairman of the House Oversight and Reform Committee. And he'd actually missed a couple of sessions there. So I guess, you know, everybody knew it was coming. And so our condolences to his family and friends. Okay, let's talk about what's going on in Syria because there's a lot of dynamics going on, and a recent development that I'm not 100% convinced is what it appears to be. But we're going to start here. Apparently, there was this meeting at the White House in the cabinet room in which Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi formally notified President Trump of this resolution passed by the House of Representatives condemning his withdrawal from Syria. And apparently it was quite rancorous and ended with Schumer and Pelosi storming out of the room. Now, each side has a different story. Nancy Pelosi went outside and talked to the reporters and said, well, Trump he's just completely out of control. He's refusing to cooperate with us, by which she means he refuses to reverse this decision and continue the war. The White House version is that it was Nancy Pelosi who had the meltdown inside the cabinet room, and they have released a photo documenting that. So that was a very, very, very ugly scene. Pelosi just had this tantrum and, you know, walked on out, which is not really protocol. And apparently Pelosi, as she stormed out of the meeting, Donald Trump kind of trolled her saying, goodbye, we'll see you at the polls. So he's obviously looking at the de-escalation of the wars as something that will help his campaign next year, because he's going to be dealing with a sick economy. And the Democrats are going to try and blame him for that one here. Now, Lindsey Graham is out there just demanding that, you know, we go back into Syria and we protect the Kurds. And Lindsey Graham is saying, I'll be Trump's worst nightmare if he abandons the Kurds. So, Lindsey, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. Watch your head climbing into that military transport and have fun. What can I tell you? Send postcards. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. We're seeing all these members of Congress who seem so concerned about the Kurds, far more so than they are about their own constituents, the American people. And the media and the politicians didn't care about the utter chaos the U.S. has caused in Syria for years. But now that they can find a way to blame Trump for it, they're outraged. It's an outrage there. Trump has abandoned the Kurds, and you know, bad things are going to happen. Syria has attacked the Kurds at a gun range in Kentucky, according to ABC News. And again, they're playing to the masses. They're pandering like crazy. And on their way out, talking to the press, they made this odd comment about praying for Donald Trump's health, which I think is a signal that they know that the impeachment move is failing. They're not going to get it. And so now they're going back to 25th Amendment. And I'm expecting that we will see in the corporate media and from various politicians claims that Trump's pulling out of Syria proves he's mentally incompetent and needs to be removed under the 25th Amendment. So we'll see how that one goes. But again, they're just pushing that war agenda just so hard. And it's not just Pelosi and Schumer. Apparently, Israel is demanding that the U.S. should maintain a strategic base in Syria at Al-Tanf. And it was set up and controlled by the U.S. military in 2016 during the Syrian conflict. And it's in this strategically important area near Syria's borders with Jordan and Iraq. It serves as a base for a group known as the Revolutionary Commando Army, which opposes both the Syrian regime and Daesh, and has received training from the U.S. in Jordan. So Israel is out there saying that if this base is shut down, it opens up the possibility for Iran to basically create a land bridge to have direct access into the region, primarily Iraq. Well, I have a message for Israel. If you think maintaining Al-Tanf is that important, why don't you do it? Why is Israel always demanding that America's young people in uniform, not to mention the taxpayer, are doing all of this? If Israel thinks Al-Tanf is important, go ahead. Take the base over, run it. Now, there was a development that happened shortly before we went to airtime where Mike Pence held a press conference announcing a Turkish ceasefire in Syria. And you have to listen very carefully to the language that he used, because it comes across as a unilateral declaration by the United States that Turkey will go along with this 120-day ceasefire so that people can get out of the way, which is a good thing. There's no question about it. But we haven't gotten a confirmation yet from Turkey. And if you think about all the hostility that has been generated with Turkey, I'm a little dubious. We certainly have not had a reaction yet from Syria as to whether they want to go along with this. And I think it's pretty much a solid bet that the Kurds are not going to be happy about this at all. So this could be a bluff to try and save Trump's reputation, because, you know, the Democrats are after him getting out of Syria. And I did notice during this press conference that both Mike Pence and Pompeo, you know, were just heaping praise on our strong President Trump and his policies. And he showed everybody who's boss, which is basically a way of trying to signal that the United States is still relevant in that part of the world. So I want to see what's going to happen. I mean, Pence had the news conference, but I mean, look how much we get lied to. So I got to tell you, my instincts are telling me that there's something wanky about the story. There really is here, especially when you consider that over in the United States Senate, they're coming up with another bill to sanction Turkey and the S-400 purchase. And Lindsey Graham is one of the sponsors of the bill, and he's expecting strong bipartisan support for the bill. So if you're trying to calm the region down, you know, you stop annoying everybody. And that makes sense to me. That's how I would do it here. Meanwhile, former President George W. Bush has come on out of the woodwork with his declaration that Trump's isolationist America is dangerous for global peace, that the only thing that is keeping planet Earth peaceful is U.S. intervention in all of these countries. Well, George, I hate to be the one to point this out to you, but if you go back and you look at all this intervention, it's the United States that has started all these wars. If the United States were to disarm or just simply crash, the world would be a much more peaceful place. It's all of the U.S. war industries, the military-industrial complex, who want the wars because they're making lots of money off of it, lots of money off of you. If you stop going around kicking over other people's trash cans and everything and causing trouble, most countries want to live in peace. They don't want war. They just want to walk on the surface of the earth, not lie underneath it full of holes. And I don't think most world leaders want war. They want commerce, peace through commerce. So W's comment out there, it's, first of all, it's highly inaccurate. It's trying to sell the idea that only by continuing all of these invasions of all these countries that the world will be at peace, when very obviously the world is most assuredly not at peace. And a lot of it has to do with the wars that he himself started. I almost get an image of George W. Bush sitting there crying and saying, "How dare you take my wars away from me? I worked hard to start these wars. I lied to the American people to start these wars. We had false flags and we dropped bombs and we did all this stuff, and you just want to quit." That's the way it's being peddled in Washington, D.C., that Trump's decision to pull out of Syria does represent a military defeat for the United States of America, and yes, it does, along with the recent developments that we're seeing up there in Afghanistan. And so what W is trying to protect is not only the war industry, he's trying to protect that war agenda that Wesley Clark blew the whistle on all those years ago. They need to keep going, because if we're seen to have to withdraw from Syria and also Afghanistan, the wheels come off the war wagon. They're not going to be able to continue. Everybody's going to say, look how much time, money, and lives we have wasted on all of this activity. It's time for it to stop. So I think for this Christmas, I mean, everybody during Christmas, they like to go around saying peace on earth, goodwill toward all men. This year, we all really have to mean it. We need peace on earth, or the earth is going to be in pieces. All right, so let's talk a little bit about domestic politics here, because Adam Schiff has been hit with a second ethics complaint over this Ukrainian prank call where he was lured into thinking that there were naked pictures of Donald Trump, apparently with these two prostitutes in the hotel in Moscow. And I have a message for Schiff directly from whatreallyhappened.com to Chairman Schiff. By now, I'm sure you understand those photos were fake. What you don't know is that when you went to look at them, we downloaded some malware onto your computer that activated the webcam and recorded your activities when you were looking at the naked Donald Trump. And unless you donate, let's just say $100 in Bitcoins to whatreallyhappened.com, we're going to release this video to every member of Congress and all your constituents. One of the problems about doing radio is you can't hear if the audience is laughing at the jokes or not. So you're out there trying to count time, let people laugh, and meanwhile there's this other voice in the back of your head saying, they're not laughing, talk now, talk now. Apparently there's been another little bit of a ruffled feathers. GOP Representative Andy Biggs was literally denied access to Schiff's Star Chambers, a little secret room in the Congress where he's running this unauthorized impeachment inquiry. And Congressman Andy Biggs is, well, he's annoyed. And he went public saying that he was denied access to Schiff's secret chamber where he's running the unauthorized impeachment inquiry of President Trump. So Biggs is one of the co-sponsors of the motion to censor Schiff over that bogus reading that he did in the Congress here. So Biggs came on out and said, Chairman Schiff and Speaker Pelosi are intentionally running Soviet-style hearings to deprive the American people of representation. And he's absolutely, absolutely right about that. Now, Brit Hume has voiced the theory that the reason why Schiff and Pelosi are being so private is the testimony they're getting from their so-called witnesses and whistleblowers is a disaster. They're not getting what they need. They're not getting what they want. And that's why they want all of these impeachment, well, now they're calling them depositions, behind closed doors. So they can selectively leak portions of the transcripts to the media and not actually let anyone see what's going on in there. Now, Sean Hannity is out there saying Pelosi doesn't really have the votes to impeach Trump. It's just not happening. Mitch McConnell, on the other hand, is warning the Senate that they may face a hearing, if you will, over Trump's removal as early as Thanksgiving. I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's falling apart. And one of the things that is dooming the effort is Adam Schiff's attitude. Because there are vulnerable Democrats out there who are running next year who are saying, this impeachment stuff is harming me. The polls are going against us. People are leaving the Democratic Party. This is going bad for us. And Schiff just shrugged. And he's not worried about this impeachment issue hurting vulnerable Democrats. He's out there saying, well, just let the chips fall where they may. Kind of a bad attitude when you're talking about a political party here. All righty, not too long ago, in fact, even during the recent Democratic debate, Joe Biden and Hunter Biden were basically out there saying there was never any discussion between Joe and Hunter about Ukraine. Well, apparently there is now a video out in which Hunter Biden admits that, yes, he and Joe Biden had conversations about the Ukraine business. Oh, my stars in heaven, they lied to us yet again. Okay. One of the lies Joe Biden has told over the years is how his first wife and 13-month-old daughter were killed by a drunk driver in 1972. And as it turns out, feel sorry for me. And yeah, I do. Lost your wife and your daughter. I do feel sorry for you. Okay. But apparently the driver has now passed away, and the family is demanding an apology because the truck driver was never charged in the crash. And according to Delaware Superior Court Judge Jerome O'Herlihy, who oversaw the police investigation, there was no evidence supporting Biden's claim. There was no alcohol involved by either party, and police determined Biden's first wife simply drove into the path of Dunn's tractor trailer, possibly because she was distracted, her head was turned, and she didn't see the oncoming truck. But even with a tragedy like that, Biden says, how can I use this? How can I use this to get the voters to vote for me here? Another little piece of business going on in Washington, D.C. is two members of the squad are now backing Bernie Sanders. And apparently poll numbers for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are dropping. So that may have been a mistake here. All right, because the independent media made such a stink about this the other day, ABC has finally admitted that the footage they showed of the Kurdish slaughter by Turkey to push the pro-war agenda was fake. It was actually shot in Kentucky. And they've issued an on-air correction and said this was a simple mistake. Well, I'm going to call bovine excrement on that one because I've worked in the media for a lot of my life. I even worked for ABC. And when you have archival footage of something that you think you need to save for a future story, it's saved, it's labeled. More about that when we come back from these words from our sponsor. Aloha America, welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about this recent debacle where ABC twice ran this video of all this fire and explosions and basically presented it as proof of the Kurds being slaughtered by Turkey to push the pro-war agenda. They got called on it, and they finally admitted it was the wrong footage, and it's a simple mistake. Well, when you keep archival footage, when you're a news corporation, you do keep footage you think you might want to reuse, and it's cataloged very carefully. It's in boxes that have labels that have the exact time and location and context of what it really is. Somebody had to go into the archive and hunt that piece of videotape down. It was no mistake. When you're in that control room there, you don't just happen to have a video of this arms and explosion demonstration in Kentucky just sitting there on the desk, slotted into the playback machine. Oops, our bad. Doesn't really work that way. Reminds me of that story coming out of BBC when they got caught with their announcer reporting the collapse of Building 7, and it was still standing behind her. And activists went over to BBC and said, can we look at the original raw footage? And BBC said, nah, we threw it out. We didn't need to keep that. We just tossed it, which is nonsense. That archival footage is a big moneymaker for news corporations. Because they license that out. That's when you watch a TV show about something historic like the war in Vietnam or whatever, you know, all of that footage that was originally shot by the news media has to be bought and paid for. License fees. It's a gold mine. And 9/11 is a huge story. So yeah, we just tossed the tape here. Okay, we have a caller on the line, Steve Elkins. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, this morning I start off the morning with watching a little bit of news. I try not to, but I have to sometimes. But
yes.
Caught the story with Elijah Cummings passing, a 68 years old congressman from Maryland.
Yeah.
Baltimore, I think, was his district. But noticing that the mainstream media, they just love to sugarcoat everything and make it all seem so nice and sweet. And Elijah Cummings was such a good man of high moral standing, a defender of the poor, and kind of skipped over that whole 2012 congressional investigation where he and Lois Lerner conspired. We'll call this a true conspiracy because we got the emails to prove it. Conspired along with the IRS, weaponized IRS, to investigate a group called Vote the Truth, it's a Houston-based organization that brings attention to voter fraud and election fraud. It was created by Catherine Engelbright. So not only was Vote the Truth scrutinized and basically gone after by the IRS, she also was herself. Nothing ever happened. The emails surfaced, and it showed that this was the truth. They weaponized the IRS. Not a thing ever happened about it. So I just wanted your listeners to know that. And here's a man who played the race card quite often.
Yes.
Rather than answer the question, especially when Donald Trump mentioned about the rodent-infested cities that he was responsible for in his district and all the money that went there, what happened to the money? He never answered the question and certainly turned around, used the race card once more again to point out the congresswomen who were insulted and told to go back to their own countries, but kind of left out the ending of that line there, that they're supposed to go fix the problems and then come back and help Elijah Cummings fix the slums in Baltimore. So they kind of left out some important information there. I kind of put him in the same category, aside of not killing anybody that I know of. As we know, John McCain was, John McCain. But they're certainly in the same category as far as I'm concerned. And I don't like it when people sugarcoat things, call a spade here. The guy was not a good guy. He's got a lot of fraud in his life if you look back in his history. And I'm just pointing out one thing in 2012 with weaponizing the IRS. Another thing happened out of it. Nothing happened.
Well, you need to remember that when somebody passes, the funeral is the one opportunity where you can say nice things about the person that would normally have drawn laughter while they were alive. So,
well, I think the Democrats would probably find a kind word to say about the devil then too, wouldn't they?
Yes, they probably would. They probably would.
That's it for me, Mike. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Okay, and before you go, I believe that you are hosting John Stadmiller's program after mine today.
I am, yeah. Vincent Finelli is going to join me. He's going to ride shotgun, and it's going to be kind of more of a USA Prepares show. We like to take a day off once a week from talking about the corruption, and you do a great job at that, so we'll give you your kudos, and we will talk more about being preparedness.
Yes. And that's going to be very important. We're going to be putting a little bit more focus on that as well, because even around here in Indiana, we're seeing the indications it's going to be a very hard winter. Anyway, Steve, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go for a commercial break. Back with more news after these fools. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we were basically commenting on the fact that ABC has now been forced to admit that they ran this bogus footage from a gun show in Kentucky and reported it as the Turks slaughtering the Kurds and showing that they are, in fact, unrepentant liars. They misreported on something Donald Trump said at the White House when he was talking about the situation in Syria. And they basically implied that Trump, in defending his Syria decision, said something along the lines of, if Turkey goes into Syria, it's between Turkey and Syria, it's not our problem. And it was picked up by a lot of the other news media who have now been forced to issue their own corrections, because what Trump actually said was, so if Russia wants to get involved with Syria, that's really up to them. They have a problem with Turkey. They have a problem at a border. It's not our border. We shouldn't be losing lives over it, which makes a great deal of sense. But again, ABC went on out there and said, how do we spin this to make it look like, Trump is weak and Trump is vacillating and Trump is going to lose. He's going to lose Syria, and we're going to be back in Vietnam syndrome again here. Now, there's a difference between the corporate media and the independent media you may want to keep in mind. Out here in the independent media at rbnwhatreallyhappened.com, we will occasionally make mistakes. We get spoofed a lot, constantly getting stories sent to us that I think are intended to try and trip us into doing something. We make mistakes. We're not 100% perfect. But with the corporate media, their deceptions are deliberate. They're intentional. They want to do this. They're paid to do it. They're ordered to do it. That's why you got to support independent media like RBN and whatreallyhappened.com. So now Megyn Kelly was interviewed on Fox News, and she just tore into corporate media for their active bias, lack of objectivity. So anyway, one way that you can tell that CNN is biased is by going back and looking at the Democratic debate and seeing how much time each candidate was given to speak, because it's not all the same. They allot the time based on who CNN thinks should be the Democrat nominee. Bernie was down to like number 8 slot. Okay. Project Veritas has issued part 3 of their video expose. And I mean, CNN has pretty much just confirmed that Project Veritas's whistleblower is telling the truth about what's going on. And it gets even worse than that. I mean, the field ops manager is saying, Zucker's 8 a.m. calls are BS. We're totally left-leaning. We don't want to admit it. And in another part of that same tape, there's a CNN executive who's openly saying, we want Trump to go away. Okay. Now, Tulsi Gabbard had a little tiny slice of time on the stage. during most of which she went after CNN and the New York Times for trying to claim that her opposition to the war in Syria somehow made her a Russian asset, which is nonsense. But she also made a point of ending U.S. support for Al-Qaeda. And the reason this is significant is we've all known for years that this has been going on, that the United States arms and trains and funds ISIS and Al-Qaeda. This is the first time a career politician has confirmed it. And that was significant. And of course, the corporate media didn't mention that one at all either. So when you go back to that statement made by George W. Bush about how, U.S. interventionism is necessary for global peace, look what the United States does to keep the wars going, because it's big business. In fact, it's the only business we still have going in this country here. So you have to go back and, study the history of the corporate media, not as told by the corporate media. You get back to something called Operation Mockingbird that goes all the way back to the end of World War II, where the U.S. government just admired the way the Nazis were able to use the media to steer their population. They grabbed a bunch of those people with Operation Paperclip. They brought them all over and said, we're going to start doing this. We're going to make sure that the top executives at all the corporate media, the newspapers, TV stations, radio, are all CIA assets or somehow compromised. Then you had in 2012 the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, which legalized the use of propaganda on the American people. Prior to that, it had been illegal. It was being done anyway. But at least it was, supposed to be a bad thing. Apparently, the deep state is having trouble keeping up with the independent media. They're finding they can't control the narrative. They haven't. They failed miserably. So apparently they're going to invest in a bunch of artificial intelligence machines to simply pour out the fake news as fast as they can to try and flood us, swamp us, it will. All right, getting on back to the war zones here. One of the reasons why I'm waiting for some feedback on Mike Pence's claim that Turkey has agreed to a ceasefire was, among other things, this letter that Trump sent to Erdogan. And it was so angry and intense, a lot of people thought it was fake. And the White House released a copy confirming, yeah, this is what we sent there. And Erdogan threw the letter right into the trash and considered it the final straw before launching his offensive in Syria, which is why I question that he would back down the way Pence is trying to claim that he is. So we'll keep an eye on that one for a while here. And, Donald Trump, we know he's full of bluff and bluster, and we know he's got a huge ego because, after all, he was a reality TV star. And what he seems to forget is that all world leaders, like himself, have monstrous egos. And you don't go on out and try and lecture at them like they're small children. So he blew that one here. I think this whole thing about Mike Pence's news broadcast is they want to tamp down the issue of Syria and Turkey until after the weekend, when it's going to be last week's old news and they can pretend it doesn't really exist here. But the U.S. has destroyed one of their former Syria bases. They're leaving more cities. In fact, they even bombed one of their own bases. And the reason is there's a lot of very sensitive equipment there that they don't want Russia to get their hands on, or for that matter, Turkey. They've blown up a lot of ammunition to keep it out of the wrong hands, which ABC should have used footage of that. It would have been at least a little more timely, a little more accurate there. But, remember, all this stuff is being blown up. You paid for it. You pay for all this very expensive, top secret equipment, and then they just toss a thermite grenade on it, and that's it. So the U.S. coalition so far have left Raqqa, Tabqa, and apparently a cement factory in Lafarge. So it really is happening. And it is a shame that Trump is pretty much standing alone on this. Meanwhile, the Syrian army is entering Kobani and Raqqa, at least of last report. Like I said, we have not had Syria's reaction to Mike Pence's press conference. There may be a reaction. There may even be a reaction from Erdogan that will simply not be reported to us. The American people right now are being mushroomed. We're being kept in the dark and fed on refuse. It's the polite word for it here. But we're seeing all these stories about how this win-win, win-win plan for Syria's northeast is succeeding. The Syrian and Russian operations in the northeast of Syria are going well. And Russian troops are preventing attempts by Turkish-supported jihadis to attack Manbij. Putin is a genius. He's a statesman. Now, as you're already aware, earlier this week, the House Democrats unanimously voted to condemn Trump's withdrawal from Syria. That's what led to this confrontation at the White House here. And so the Democratic leaders are suggesting that an unconditional opposition to Trump's ending any war and withholding any troops under any circumstances, they're objecting to this notion that the president can end a war without their permission. Well, I hate to be the one to point this out, but they never gave their permission for this war to happen. And in prior wars, when they've been ended, usually by a president like Roosevelt or Truman, Congress doesn't get its knickers in a twist. And here we have the U.S. House of Representatives, Democrats out there say, how dare you end this war before we want it over? So, now according to the U.S. Special Envoy on Iran, Brian Hook, he's out there testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that pulling out from Syria by the United States does not affect the Iran agenda that, by golly, we're going to go in and we're going to mess them up real good. So that war is, at least on paper, still officially on. I don't think so. I think if Syria basically succeeds in recovering all of its territory, I think probably most of the world's countries are already looking at the United States and saying, you know, they can't pull it off. They bit off more than they could chew. They can't make this work. Now, do you remember a while back there was this attack on a Saudi oil refinery, which was immediately, and I should point out without any evidence, blamed on Iran? Well, U.S. officials are now confirming that the United States did execute a secret cyber attack on Iran that resulted in damaging physical hardware. Reason to stop putting computers and everything makes you a potential victim. Over in Israel, more than 1,000 Palestinians in Gaza now have bone infections after being shot by the Israeli forces. More than 7,400 Palestinians have been injured by live fire ammunition during the Great March of Return protests in Gaza, and about half of those suffering from open fractures in which the bone is literally broken near the wound. The Israelis were deliberately shooting these people in the legs, and it takes years of surgery, dressing, physiotherapy, you know, to recover from a wound like that. It's definitely a crippling wound. Over in North Korea, Kim Jong-un rode a white horse up to the top of Mount Piktu, which is apparently an annual symbolic gesture. The horse has to be white and so forth and so on. While he was at the summit of this active volcano, basically lashed out at sanctions imposed on the country, and basically promised that North Korea was going to impress the world with its new step forward in the Korean Revolution. Over in Hong Kong, the leader of those protests has been attacked a second time, this time with hammers and wrenches. They just basically beat the heck out of this guy. And this is Jimmy Sham Tazkit, and he's one of Hong Kong's biggest organizers of the non-violent demonstrators, and he was brutally attacked by these thugs. Now, he's still alive, and I think the reason for that is that he's being warned to stop doing what he's doing, but the Beijing government does not need a martyr, which is what's going to happen. He gets killed. All righty, war is big business. I said it before. Do you know that America sold over $55 billion in weapons in fiscal year 2019? So of course they're going to go on out and create market demand by starting wars. I don't know if you've ever seen Oliver Stone's movie JFK and the mysterious Mr. X, who is thought by many to have been inspired by Fletcher Prouty. He was just talking about, the reality before Vietnam got going. There was no money for the military. Nobody was getting promoted. It was kind of stagnant. So all of a sudden they kick up a war, and, the Bell Helicopters getting contracts, and, General Dynamics is getting contracts. 58,000 of our kids got killed. All right, let's talk a little bit about the economic news. Oil tanker rates are exploding to record levels amid the flurry of geopolitical risks. And the article is taking the position about, are they price gouging? Maybe they are. But you need to understand that those oil tankers are very expensive. And their cost does have to be amortized over their lifespan. And the less oil they're actually carrying, the less money they're making. So I think this was predictable. Okay, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Okay, the International Monetary Fund has slashed, original source article quote, the global growth forecast once again, saying that economic growth will fall to its weakest rate since the financial crisis a decade ago. And the IMF is saying that the world economy is in a synchronized slowdown, which is a very polite way of saying it's all falling apart at the same time everywhere. And if you want to know how desperate they are to try and keep this thing going, Federal Reserve Treasury purchases are costing as much as U.S. military spending. That's how much they're doing to try and, keep the Treasury bonds propped up. Because there's a Treasury bond bubble. And countries all over the world are dumping the Treasury bonds and keep saying, well, who's actually buying them? Well, the Federal Reserve is. And they're creating all this instant money out of thin air, equal in size to U.S. military spending. And they can't keep that up for very long. Anyway, Russia and Turkey have agreed on business settlements, economic settlements between their two countries in their national currencies. They are not going to use the dollar anymore. They're joining a growing trend. And it's another reason to question, if Turkey really is, coming back on board with the Trump White House regarding Syria. I mean, there's just too much that's wanky about that story here. An outlook for a China trade deal continues to deteriorate. Earlier in the week, Trump had announced that there was a light deal that was about to be signed, and that goosed the stock market upward. And then China came on back and said, no, we haven't agreed to anything here. The U.S. is not meeting our demands. And so the possibility of a new China trade deal is looking less and less. Now, as far as China is concerned, they continue to trade with other countries. They're still buying oil from Iran, which is irking the United States no end. I'll tell you who's making out from this is Vietnam. Because since the end of the war in Vietnam, Vietnam itself has been building up its manufacturing capability. And they're now starting to sell to American companies. I'm sure they're probably goosing the prices a little bit to sort of give us some payback for what we did to their country all those years ago. Who can blame them? Right now, 69% of U.S. households are preparing for a possible recession. So should you be here. WeWork may have to change its name to We Laying Off because they're cutting 2,000 jobs tomorrow. God, all the press they got, and oh, we're great and we're doing this and we're doing, they're falling apart. They really are. All right, immigration refugee news. California's Governor Newsom has signed a law allowing illegal immigrants to serve on state boards. This guy is making Governor Moonbeam look good. Back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, there was this guy named Sean Buchanan, open borders advocate, supported the illegal immigrants, Trump hater, and he died last week at the hands of a criminal, illegal alien, Ramirez Valiente, who was driving without a license, swerved into his lane, and killed him. I would imagine among Sean's circle of friends that the ardor for open borders and illegal immigrants might be cooling a little bit. Well, out in California, they're still talking about the wildfires. They're talking about the deliberate blackouts that were harmful. And unfortunately, they're saying, you better get used to it. This is the new normal. And according to Region 8 of FEMA, which covers California, said, yeah, this is the new normal. They're going to be deliberately controlled electrical blackouts. So if you live in California, you'd better think about getting a generator or a battery backup system or something, because you cannot rely on that wall socket any longer. They're announcing it. Yeah, it's going to go off. And you look at a lot of other countries where all of a sudden, you know, the utilities stop being reliable, and you see it as signs of a coming collapse. And that's exactly how I see this. Water doesn't come out of the tap. Electricity doesn't come out of the wall. The internet keeps crashing. Apparently, Verizon was down all over the country earlier today. Now, over in Great Britain, there's been a new development in the Skripal case that confirms it was all a sham, because the coroner's court has issued a public statement saying that the investigation into the Skripal's illness and where it might have come from, and this one lady, Dawn Sturgis, who supposedly died after touching one of Yulia's perfume bottles, has been adjourned indefinitely. Which means they can't find anything that they can use to continue that story that this was all Russia, Russia, Russia. And it never really made sense anyway for Russia to do this, especially on British soil here. All right, we're going to take a phone call now from Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I want to point out to, of course, I live in Los Angeles as you used to, and I want people to think about there are estimates that nobody knows for sure, but there are estimates that there's as many as 3 or 4 million illegals in the greater LA area.
Yeah, I've heard that
from
number.
the South Bay to Santa Barbara and out to Riverside, out of the 50 million people in California, I'd say that's probably an underestimate, really.
Yeah.
But we're having these rolling blackouts. And if you can imagine taking 3 million off the LA grid, 3 million consumers off the LA grid, would they need to black us out?
Well, that's a very good question.
Right, or we've got a water shortage, Mike, and we've got to pipe the water in from Owens Valley, hundreds of miles away. And if there were 3 million fewer consumers of water, would we have what would the water situation be? Or
it would certainly be a lot better than it is right now. And of course, a big part of that problem is the water system isn't being maintained. The mains underneath Los Angeles itself are literally leaking millions of gallons of usable water back down into the soil because they haven't been keeping that maintained here. And we're looking at food shortages this winter. When you
absolutely.
How are we going to feed all of these millions of illegal immigrants when we can't even feed our own people? Now, I know that 3 million figure. Right? I'm sorry?
Who are getting welfare, many of them.
Yeah, they are. They're on, the taxpayers
food
paying.
Stamps. Yeah.
Healthcare, all of it.
Mike, about 10 years ago, and I know I've cited this before, there was a study that said about a third of the students in LA Unified School System were the children of illegals. And that was, of course, before the Sanctuary City thing.
Yes.
And by the way, they are more expensive students. You need to hire bilingual teachers and have special textbooks, and they all get those free lunches and breakfast programs and all that. They're far more expensive than a normal student, and yet you have to teach down to them because they may even be illiterate in their own language, let alone English. But at any rate, so if you take all that together, the electrical grid, the water grid, how about the traffic on the freeways and how horribly overstressed our infrastructure is here. And if you take, let's say, 3 million cars or whatever off of the freeways, the ones that break down, by the way, more frequently than others, the older ones, what would that experience be like? So it has a huge cost.
Yeah, it is a huge cost. And, these illegal immigrants, for whatever reason, globalism, George Soros, easy Democratic votes. But these illegal immigrants are getting better treatment from the U.S. government than we, the legal American citizens, are.
Yeah, it appears to be that's true.
Yeah.
And Mike, I mean, at what point, remember a couple of years ago, more than a couple, about 25 years ago, when Quebec had there was an election there to see whether they were going to break away from Canada.
Yes.
And I would tell you that with and it was very close and probably was fixed, just like the Scottish were and everything else in Britain. But it was a very close vote. And I would tell you that they speak a different language. Mm-hmm. They are loyal to a different country in many ways. You should see I know you've seen it, all the Mexican flags that fly everywhere.
Yes.
They have they have no real tie. They have closer ties to Mexico than they do the United States.
And don't forget all the money that they're sending back to their home countries, to their families. I mean, that's a huge economic drain at a time when this nation cannot afford it.
And they've got organizations like La Raza, which openly proclaim that they want to be separatist. So I'm telling you, it's no given that this will survive as the United States. Why are we so different from Quebec or Catalan, for that matter, or whatever? They're not obeying. They're already not obeying our government, the laws of the federal government. Which is what the Civil War, to a large extent, was fought over. So this is, this is really bad. And then, of course, whatever. This has been foisted on us by the Open Borders guys,
yes,
by the Soros guys, the Antifa guys, the Democratic Party guys, and it's really it's the dissolution of the United States.
yes,
And on top of what I talked about yesterday, with the denunciations and the heaping abuse on whites,
yes.
everything is meant to dissolve the integrity of the United States. So.
Well, I don't know if that's really the intention or not, but it's certainly having that effect. And you're absolutely right. This focus on hating the white guy and wanting them to go. I mean, literally, we've got people out there, supporting the idea of a white genocide. And, we've already seen how this worked out in Zimbabwe and South Africa, and it was a disaster for the country and its people. And yet we've got Americans advocating for it here.
Well, when you think about what happened in South Africa, what's happening now in South Africa,
yes.
when some of those people have been there for 10 generations,
yes.
And built up their farms and so on, they're not being reimbursed. They're just having them taken away. They're being murdered wholesale. But the fact of the matter is, most of the Mexicans also believe that this is a reconquest of area that belonged to them. That the people that hold, like me, who own property here, have got it illegally, immorally, illegitimately. Yes. And I'm telling you that the attitude, as we shrink and we're already about a 40% of the population here. They're going to start saying, when we get to 25 maybe or 20, they're going to say, well, what do you have this ill-gotten land? You have no business having this land, right? Well, just like they're saying in South Africa. How far away is that really?
The issue, at least as far as California and that part of the country is concerned here, the La Raza is basically making the claim that Generalissimo Santa Anna did not have the legal authority to cede any part of Mexico to Sam Houston following that whole Alamo thing. And so they're saying that American occupation of that land has been illegitimate all along. And of course, they're very annoyed at all the gold that we took out of that ground there. It's an ugly situation, but it does seem to be heading toward violence.
All the ingredients are there, Mike, that point to a continuum that looks like South Africa.
Yes, absolutely.
To me, it is, anyways. So it's but it's going to happen here first because of the demographics, but it'll happen nationwide, and you can see it with the demonizing and illegitimization of basically of white people every way, and in every way you can do it. And of course, you just said they're putting illegals on state boards here in California.
I mean that's insane. They shouldn't even be there, let alone being given administrative powers over the legal citizens of California. I mean, it really is absurd. Like I said, this makes Governor Moonbeam look good.
And they're voting by the millions. So somebody said the other day, I think it was Tom. Tom said that there will never be another Anglo governor of California. Yeah, it's done. It's over. There'll never be another Republican in California.
Yep.
It just, and they've engineered that really completely. And I can remember back when Clinton, in the Clinton administration, when he was deploying border patrol assets, he would like fortify areas, and so that the illegals would come in to areas that he wanted to politically change.
Yes.
And then when they had changed, he would fortify other areas. So they would go into other areas that the Democrats would politically change.
Well, we saw that.
So this has been going on for a long time.
That. Yeah, it's been going on for a long time. We saw it during the 2018 midterms. When California, when I lived there, was a red state. And during the 2018 midterm elections, 4 formerly GOP districts went Democrat. And they did it because they were filled with these illegal immigrants. You know, they don't just stay at the border when they come across from Mexico. They're put on buses. Some of them even get airplane rides. They're being deliberately blended into the population. And you're right, the Democrats are using them to target GOP areas. They're targeting districts where the Republicans are just slightly ahead in order to shift the numbers and shift the district blue.
Well, this happened also in the Clinton administration. Prior to the 96 election, Clinton fired off a memo to Doris Meisner, who was then head of the INS, and said basically, Doris, we want as many people naturalized to be able to vote in the 1996 election as possible. And so she came up with a package that streamlined, like they didn't have to wait so long, and they streamlined, and among them was they did away with the criminal background check in the host countries, in the countries that they came to.
Well, that was...
And because of that, you know, a whole bunch of hundreds of thousands of criminals that would have been caught had he not fired off that memo became American citizens. And that's why we have FBI liaison offices in all the embassies, is exactly to do that, and consulates, to do criminal background checks on people coming in and applying for citizenship. That's one of the main reasons why they're there. Well, that was done away with under Clinton in order to game the 96 elections. So, you know, whatever.
What a mess. It's a mess. Anyway, Peter, the phone lines are loading up. I'm going to let you go. And we're going to switch over to Errol in the Netherlands. Aloha, Errol. Thank you for waiting patiently. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hello. Thank you for taking my call, Mike. You're speaking with Errol from the Netherlands. I don't know if you already have talked about the Project Veritas.
Yes, we did earlier in the program.
Okay. I want just to say this man, again, we got a Jeff Zucker, and this is very interesting. Also, here in the Netherlands, I got a guy I get money from, and his first name is Jeff. I get money from Jeff. Anyways, Jeff Zucker from CNN has said, in the third part of the Project Veritas, he said, maybe it could be the faster the better that the president was dead.
Yes, I saw that.
And that is very dangerous to say, because you never say that about the president. I don't agree with President Obama or with Bush or with Clinton or with any president. Also, I don't ever agree with any president. But you don't say that about the president that is ruling or not ruling or steering your country. You don't say that. No?
Well, I mean, the guy who said it didn't realize that it was going to be made public. I mean, this was an undercover reporting. And right now, we're seeing the corporate media is trying to cover for CNN by saying that Project Veritas lies. They've lied all the time, blah, blah, blah. Project Veritas uses tapes of these people saying these things. That's something that you can't fake. But they're out there saying, well, it's selectively edited, and, you know, they're using computers to change people's words, and they're trying very desperately to make this go away. But I mean, look what they did to Fetzer over his book on Sandy Hook. If they actually could find that Project Veritas was doing something dishonest, same thing. They'd go to court, hit him with $1 million fine, and drive him out of business.
And that is where I want to hook in. I want to put something on top on it that every American should know, because the U.S. sends 7,000, yes, 7 with 3 zeros, $7,000 per minute to Israel, and Israel has the might, has the power to have that money. And what do? They give that to the dual citizenships that are in Congress to buy them off, and to make another policy and to create another entity, so that the United States is in, I call it a parasitic state.
We're the host. The United States is the host. Israel's the parasite. Exactly. And this gets back to an article we had at the top of the show where Israel is demanding that the United States maintain the Al-Tanf base in Syria. And my response to that is, look at all the money we've given Israel. If Israel thinks Al-Tanf is important, why don't they take it over and run it? But no. That's what the Americans are for. You know, we don't risk our own precious Israeli children, in these foreign adventures. That's what the Americans are for.
You must see it like this: we are the hive, and Israel is the queen. Now, when you have an ant an ant farm, a very big ant, how do you call it? An ant where the ants are. You know, you have one queen.
Yeah. Well, I used to keep ant farms.
And the queen
briefly
is Israel.
I kept beehives.
Yes.
And we discovered my younger brother was allergic to bee stings, and I had to smoke the hives. All right, listen, thank you for the phone call. We got to take a break for commercials. We've got other people waiting on the line. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the phones here to Ken in Fort Worth. Aloha, Ken. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Howdy. Trump is going to be landing over here at Carswell Air Force Base any time now.
Yeah.
And let me explain to you. Right across the runway from the air base is where they build the F-35s. Just right across the runway almost. And also he's going to go chop it down to a guy's got a factory down there in nearby county. And he's going to do that for a while. Then he's going to chop her back and probably have dinner with some troopers in there, I would suspect. He might even go in the factory and look around, but I hope he does. Anyway, then he's going to do a show about 6:30 here.
Yes.
Central. Something like that. Anyway, I'll be coming in any time now.
All right. Well, keep an eye on him. Somebody's trying to float around the story that Nancy Pelosi was trying to send a secret signal that there will be an attempt on Trump's life. And I think it was an attempt to one of these hoax stories to try and get the independent media looking foolish, which is why I didn't go with it. But, at some point, I mean, the way this hostility is building up toward this man, I'm expecting there to be at some point, not necessarily today, but at some point, I'm expecting there's going to be an attempt on his life.
Hope not. Lord, take care of him. In Jesus' name, amen. Period. Bye.
All right, thank you. And we're going to switch over to Johnny in Vancouver. Johnny, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
Hey, dude, I wanted to talk to you about that referendum that happened in Quebec that your previous caller was talking about.
Yep.
And, us here in Western Canada, we were down on our knees praying that actually Quebec would separate. Because
I remember that.
Yeah, we were, Western Canada we're the one who's feeding the cow.
Yep.
And they're the ones that are milking it. And they ain't giving us no butter back. So I'd really be appreciated if they just walked away and left us alone.
Not going to happen. Not going to happen.
Well,
the way the world works is the strong take and the weak surrender until it reaches a point of imbalance where the force of necessity is equal on both sides, and that's when the blood starts flowing.
Okay. Well, that was my rant for the day. You have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, getting on back to this Seth Rich story here, as you're probably aware, Judicial Watch filed a Freedom of Information Act with the FBI for all records related to Seth Rich. And the FBI came on back and said, there are no records. And Judicial Watch came on out and said, the Department of Justice is saying all these records were collected and kept and archived. And now the FBI is out there saying, well, the Department of Justice, they're lying. They're just a bunch of liars over there. And, we're the FBI. And, we don't do things like that. But a while back, the FBI admitted Seth Rich's DNC computer and emails were being investigated. So, obvious cover-up. Obvious cover-up. All right, Beto O'Rourke is running his campaign focusing on the gun grab. We want the guns. You know, our soldiers can have guns. Fast and Furious druggies can have guns. But you, the American people, really, you don't need to have guns. You got the police to take care of you. You know, like those two that shot those 3 kids in the head the other day. So Beto is pledging consequences that if people don't turn in their legally purchased firearms under his program, that the police will start conducting raids. They'll kick down your door, come on in, take your guns and take them away, because obviously this government is now very much afraid of the American people. And again, that goes back to that earlier story. They've lost the narrative. They can't control us with lies, fraud, and deception any longer. It just doesn't work. And Beto O'Rourke then went on to make a ridiculous statement saying the potential mass shooters will hand over their AR-15s. I'm not expecting hardly anybody to hand anything over. Matter of fact, you remember that federal ban on bump stocks? Hardly anybody's turned those in either. As it turns out, those are actually very easy to improvise in your home workshop here. Now, the police have confiscated, under the red flag law, the police have confiscated the firearms of a Korean War veteran. He's 84 years old. And he has actually helped local law enforcement over the last 60 years. And they just came on in and confiscated his firearms. He was relieved of his duties as an elementary school crossing guard last month after a waitress. All right, we're going to put this on hold because you got to hear this one out to the end. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Speaking of the blessings of liberty here, we're talking about this 84-year-old man, Stephen Nichols. He's a Korean War veteran. He's worked with, in some capacity, with law enforcement for 6 decades. And they came over and confiscated all of his firearms under the red flag law. And it turns out that, you know, this waitress at Linda Jean's restaurant reported Nichols to authorities after she said she overheard him talking to a friend and believed he was making a threat. Now, other people around there are saying, no, that's not what he said. So he's not been charged with any crimes. He's been reinstated to his job as a crossing guard. But unfortunately, because of the way the red flag laws are written, the police are going to go ahead with selling his firearm collection and basically, you know, putting the money into their budget. Yeah, terrible, terrible thing here. All righty, getting onto the world of political correctness here. And apparently, over in Great Britain, there's this doctor who's come out with this report where he's been studying the phenomenon of the gender-neutral restrooms. And what he's discovered is that girls are resisting going to the bathroom. They're not drinking water during the day to avoid having to deal with the boys in the gender-neutral restrooms, and that this could trigger an epidemic of bladder infections, which are not fun, are they, Claire? Claire says no. So it's another classic case of, you know, this is liberalism, and we're going to do the gender-neutral, you know, bathrooms here, and it's all going to be wonderful. Okay, moving on down here. Now, we've all been talking about Greta Thunberg. She was this young lady who went before the United Nations and tearfully talked about, you know, wanting to be able to grow up to be an adult in a world where the climate had not been driven crazy. And this is not the first time they've done this little trick with a tantrum. Back in 1992, they had this 12-year-old Severn Collis Suzuki of Canada spoke at the plenary session of the United Nations Earth Summit. which took place in Rio de Janeiro that year, saying virtually the same thing that Greta Thunberg said. So they're working from a script here. And now somebody's done a little bit of digging and found a direct link between Greta Thunberg and Al Gore's operation. All just this big lie. And of course, everybody around here is saying, global warming, are you kidding? I mean, it's just not happening. And this one takes the cake here. Bank of England is warning that there will be an abrupt financial collapse due to the climate emergency. They all know it's coming apart. The economy around the world is coming apart, heading for a reset, and they're going to blame human-caused global warming for it. We didn't mess up the economy, we bankers, we money junkers. I mean, it was all your fault. You refused to get on board with our climate program, with our environmentalism. Talk about desperation on the cusp of madness here. Okay, let's see. I need to do there. Over in London, as you know, there's this group called the Extinction Rebellion, and they're holding all these protests all over. We've got to have climate. We've got to have change now. We've got to stop human-caused global warming. Try telling that to all those Midwest farmers who are losing their crops to the extreme blizzard. And apparently, in the latest altercation, climate protesters climbed on a London train to stop it from leaving the station and putting carbon into the atmosphere. And the commuters just got so angry, they literally dragged these protesters off the top of the trains and dragged them back to the platform, basically roughed them up. So the Extinction Rebellion had a plan for a demonstration at Gatwick. They've now canceled that. Because apparently they were not treated very, very gently. Meanwhile, the London police are saying that the commuters who attacked the Extinction Rebellion tube protesters could face a police investigation. Okay, why? Why are the Extinction Rebellion people who are interfering with public transport, why are they not facing an investigation themselves? Why didn't the police get these protesters off the top of these trains? Got to think these things through. And by the way, it's come on out that these Extinction Rebellion protesters are being paid $500 a week by George Soros. So he's still out there at the forefront protesting all this nonsense here. All right, as I mentioned a little earlier in the show, there was a Verizon outage across the U.S. Data, texting, calls fail. As of the last report, still no word when the issue will be resolved. And again, it's like I was saying about, the power outages out in California. This is the new normal. And this is very alarming because just like we are dependent on the electricity coming out of the wall, we're dependent on the water coming out of the faucets, our lives are dependent on these gadgets, the computers, the cell phones, and all the rest of that. It's kind of interesting. We were down at the local hardware store this morning, and it's owned and run by a very, very nice gentleman. And I just bought one little item, a piece of plastic tubing to help drain some water from someplace it shouldn't have been. And the total cost of the tubing was like $1.60. And this guy is trying to use this computerized register, and it just kept giving him grief, and he kept having to start over. And he says, I really hate these things. I like the way it used to be. You'd punch in the number, you'd hit the button, you got the money, everybody goes home. Now it's got all these screens, and he's got to enter code numbers. Oh my goodness, Michael Rivero bought some rubber tubing. All right, we're going to take a phone call now. Terry in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, that Democratic debate, we had people up there that are talking like dictators. This is what we're going to do.
Yep.
Regardless of what the people that they work for want. Like Beto O'Rourke is just one. There's other people up there too.
Yeah.
But you're probably familiar with the Missouri gun laws, right? Anyway, I'm going to read you
really, not having been to Missouri recently.
Okay, here's the latest law. It's not very long. All federal acts, laws, executive orders, administrative orders, court orders, rules and regulations, whether past, present, or future, which infringe on the people's right to keep and bear arms as guaranteed in the Second Amendment of the United States, Section 1 and 23, and 23 of the Missouri Constitution shall be invalid in this state, shall not be recognized by the state. Yeah, shall be specifically rejected by the state, and shall be considered null and void and of no effect in this state. That means they're not going to recognize any federal laws in Missouri, and they're going to actively restrict their law enforcement officers from enforcing them. And there was a chart, they had, Missouri and they had California, all states, but they had, what the requirements, right down the line. There was no restrictions, no, you don't have to get a permit to have a concealed weapon, all the way down. Now, what's Beto O'Rourke going to do in Missouri? Is he going to take the federal police and go to every door in Missouri? It's a pretty big state. And
he takes the Army. I mean, remember that combat arms survey that they did with the Marines some years ago? Would you be willing to participate in gun confiscation from law-abiding American citizens? Would you be willing to shoot any citizens who resist? I mean, that's literally at some point they're going to gin up a reason to just go on out and say, look, guns are now banned. And for some reason, they're obsessed about the AR-15 and the AK-47. Even those weapons are among the least used in criminal activity. I mean, they're always used in these mass shootings for the news value. But, when somebody's holding up the local convenience store, that's always going to, that's a Saturday night special. And, they're trying to deal with the problem of the fact that guns can now be 3D printed at home. And it's not that hard to build a gun. Now, I got to be very honest here. Somebody sent me the parts for an AR-15 this last year, and I botched it. I botched it really badly because my prior gun building experience was way back when I was like in my 20s. Black powder guns, which are easy to put together, and they're fun to shoot. And you put holes in paper, and that's what they're for. But the fact of the matter...
I'm sorry, can U.S. Department of Justice go in and arrest a governor? Or this law was passed by the legislature, state legislature. Whose laws take precedent?
Well, that's always been an issue.
Federal government.
That's always been an issue, where the federal government's approach is our laws reign supreme. But again, as we're seeing in all these states with sanctuary cities, the states are straining at the leashes right now. And all I can say is congratulations to the people of Missouri for getting this law passed. Certainly around here in Indiana, everybody takes guns and shooting very, very seriously. There's a lot of gun ranges. There's a lot of gun safety training. The local Walmart is still selling firearms. And, it's a great place, to be a sporting enthusiast here.
Yeah, what I don't know, though, is can I go into a gun store in Missouri and buy a gun with an out-of-state license? See, I don't know that yet.
I don't know that either. Again, I haven't been to Missouri for a very long time. I haven't bought a gun since I lived in Los Angeles in the aftermath of the Rodney King riots. And then I eventually sold those in Washington State.
According to this law, they might say, we're no longer requiring background checks. If you want to buy a gun, you can buy it. I don't know how that's going to work out. It could cause some real, some revolution or something when they try to come into another civil war with its state rights against U.S. rights, U.S. laws.
Well, that was the real cause of the first Civil War, was the emerging federal government when the Constitution had reserved the power and authority to the states themselves. Especially right. if you study the constitutional amendments that were passed once the Civil War was over, you see the federal government grabbing and consolidating power left and right. They took away the right of the states to question the government debt. That's when we really started getting into serious trouble, where the federal government said, we can borrow all the money that we want, and you can't do a thing about it.
Yeah. Okay, Mike, I'm going to let you go. I'm going to go call a gun store in Missouri right now and ask them about that, if I can buy a gun without a state license. And if they're going to do a background check.
Good luck. Good luck. And I hope you get it. I hope you get it. I'm the opposite of a gun grabber.
Sure
I think everybody should have. I think everybody should have a firearm, and they should have mandatory firearm safety training, because that's the world that I grew up in. Everybody got their first gun on their 12th birthday, and they got the lecture on gun safety. And in all the years I lived in that town, there was never a mass shooting. There was never a murder. There was one attempted suicide, and that was it. We did, the more gun laws they pass, the more they push us on in, the worse the violence seems to get, which has a grounding in psychology, because they've done experiments where they'll take populations of lab rats or mice, and they'll put them in denser and denser living conditions, and at some point, the animals go crazy. They start eating each other.
Right. That's what's going to happen to the human population when it goes up to 20 billion, like we talked about before.
Well, fortunately, we all taste like chicken.
Yeah, well, they're going to have these wars. The more resources get limited, the more conflict they're going to have, and the more war. So,
yep.
We're going to limit our population on our own. Okay, Mike.
Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Apparently, Ryan Dawson has raised the flag, if you will, saying that a lot of YouTube and Vimeo channels have now been deleted. Now, the message he sent wasn't specific. He's not saying if my YouTube channels are being touched. But, I mean, the clampdown is real. The government wants to be able to go back to a world in which you have no choice but to believe what the TV sets and the politicians are telling you. They've lost that. We took it away from them. Of course, they helped by being such liars and such obvious clumsy ones. But it really is, it's a Soviet-style clampdown on open communications. Apparently, one of these social media companies here, Yahoo Groups, they're shutting that down. Yahoo Groups is where people got together to share information back and forth. Yahoo is shutting it down. You will only listen to the news what the radio will give you. All right, talking about computers, we already talked about what happened with Verizon, and again, no word yet on whether the situation has been resolved. But apparently, the latest wrinkle in the hacker's toolkit is they're starting to hide malicious code in WAV audio files. Now, playing the audio file does not infect your machine, but it's being used as a storage location for large blocks of malicious code, so it can't be detected by antivirus software. And it's being done through a well-known process called steganography. But just something to keep your eye out for. If that WAV file sounds a little fuzzy and blurry, you might have a problem on there. Okay, Samsung has a new Galaxy phone. Oh, got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about computers right now. And Samsung has this Galaxy S10 phone, which has been discovered that pretty much anybody's thumbprint will unlock. And this was discovered by accident by a British woman whose husband was able to unlock her phone with his thumbprint just by adding a cheap screen protector. There's some good engineering there for you. The thumbprint fingerprint scanner on the Apple iPhone is very sensitive. And there was an incident where I seriously gouged a finger and my iPhone wouldn't recognize me anymore. Fortunately, I had put a second one in there so I could open the phone left-handed, and I was able to fix that. But I don't know what Samsung did. They didn't fully test it on out. I mean, people put screen protectors on their phones. This one's going to wake you up a little bit here, and this, again, gets on back to Donald Trump's failure to deal with this issue of election fraud. Because apparently researchers assembled over 100 different manufactured voting machines, and hackers managed to break into every single one. There's a confidence builder there. And the latest thing to come out of the Vatican from His Popeness, they're selling, mind you, an 85-pound app called Click to Pray. It's apparently virtual rosary beads that connect to the smartphones. And they're doing it because they want to attract young people to the church. Don't think it's going to work. Don't think it's going to work. We've been talking about Dr. Gilbert Levin and the Viking missions to Mars back in 1976, and we're talking about it because his recent op-ed in Scientific American has been picked up. The corporate media is actually giving this story a lot of play, and it may be because of that idiotic statement made by that NASA administrator that they may have an announcement about life on Mars within another year, but they don't really feel the American public is ready for it. It was a dumb thing to say, either announce it or don't announce it. Remember the Martian meteorite that had what looked like fossil bacteria in it? So over at Natural News, they've got this article about it, underscoring the fact that ever since Viking, NASA has never launched another mission to Mars that contained any life detection experiments. They probably want to avoid the embarrassment of saying, whoops, we were wrong, Dr. Levin was right. And again, Dr. Levin's experiment was known to work. Oh, boy, the show is going fast here. All right, we're going to take a station identification break, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're following up on Dr. Gilbert Levin and his labeled release experiment. Now, this was the device on Viking that said, yeah, there's microbial life. And they got the same positive results at both Viking landers, which were like thousands of miles apart on the Martian surface. And they ran 4 sets of experiments, all came back positive. They ran 5 sets of controls in which they literally cooked the nutrient solution to kill anything that was in it. And so, of course, no metabolic products were being produced from that. Other scientists around the world have looked at the data and said, yes, there is indigenous life on Mars. And, you know, NASA's been hemming and hawing about it ever since. And now they're saying, well, you know, we're finding all these indications that Mars may have had life once in the past. Well, looking at the extremophiles here on planet Earth, life evolves to fit its environment. Stuff that you have around, like the deep sea thermal vents, near the ice caps, places where you and I can't go without protection. But since 1976, NASA has not included any life detection experiments, and they're not including one on next year's Mars 2020 probe. Because they don't want to have to go back and admit that they were wrong. NASA means never a straight answer. And the decision to say that there was no life on Mars was purely political. It wasn't based on the science. The science said there's indigenous life there. And NASA relied on a different experiment, the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, and said, well, we didn't find any organic molecules with this, therefore there cannot be life. There's two flaws with that. One, maybe Martian life uses different organic molecules. But more importantly, it's been determined several times since Martian soil contains large amounts of a chemical class called perchlorates. And perchlorates, in the presence of heat, disassemble organic molecules. So the GCMS was literally destroying any possible organic molecules before it could detect them. And NASA has just stuck with this story ever since then. And I'm glad that Gilbert Levin is getting the attention that he deserves, because he deserves a vindication. So, you know, why was the U.S. government hiding the truth from the world? I mean, they went through this whole song and dance with that Martian meteorite, saying, oh, no, they may look like fossil microbes, but they really have to be something else. The revelation that there is, in fact, life out there in the universe will change the world literally. And we humans might decide to put down our weapons of war and unite together and say, let's go find out. Let's go on out there and find out. Let's just take even just a quarter of the money being spent on weaponry, put it back into space exploration. That would be a loss, of course, of the military-industrial complex, and it would be a loss of control by the government. Thus realizing that, you know, we're not alone. There's other life out there, possibly other, you know, intelligent life, possibly different ways of running a planet. Let's see, Franciscan monks, when Marco Polo returned from China, they tossed him in a dungeon because they thought that if the ordinary people of Europe found out there was this amazing civilization far to the east that had never even heard of Jesus, that it would undermine the authority of the church. Information did get on out. So you need to look at the lengths that organizations and individuals will go to maintain their power, control, and wealth. These are not honorable people. I mean, heck, look at the problem we've got with pedophilia in the church. They're not nice people. They sell you on the idea they're nice people. Not really. Okay, this is kind of interesting for you microbiologists out there. Scientists have discovered electric bacteria. Now, there are bacteria found in oxygen-deprived sediment and soil are able to generate electricity. But they've learned that the organism achieves this through a method that differs from others used by electric bacteria. So the bacteria in this case is called Geobacter sulfuroreducens, and it's an anaerobic bacteria and possesses a unique biological structure, which researchers think could be used to create next generation batteries, things like miniature pacemakers. I think the regular battery companies are going to buy that one up. They're not going to want that one on the market very much. Okay, the feds have taken down the world's largest dark web child porn marketplace. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. And the website's now been closed. It was in English language called Welcome to Video, contained more than 200,000 unique videos, 8 terabytes of data showing sex acts involving children, toddlers, and infants. And they've charged this 23-year-old South Korean man for running this thing. And apparently, he made more than $730,000 doing this. So according to prosecutors, the vast online store was run by Jong Woo-sun, a South Korean citizen who's already serving an 18-month prison sentence in his home country after his conviction on charges related to child pornography. And I'm sorry, I view this all as insanely sick. You don't do that to children. And my question is always going to be, where were the parents when all this was going down? Were they part of the problem? Were they willing to basically rent their kids out for this kind of activity? And as I said before, in a different context, if you go to a porn website, you're just asking for trouble. And I'm sure probably this site downloaded a lot of malware onto a lot of people's computers here. Alrighty, let's see. Apparently, there's a story that's coming on out from Blabberbuzz. Actually originates on InfoWars. Well, okay. But apparently Alex Jones went with this story that there may be an attempt on Donald Trump's life later today. And I certainly hope not. I mean, I'll be the first to admit I'm very disappointed in the man. But I wish him no harm. And again, we have to be so careful about what we're being sent here in the independent media, because they're trying to trip us up. They're trying to get us to say things that they can use to justify shutting down websites. Oh, you're an anti-Semite something. Okay. Apparently, Mulvaney is saying that the White House did hold up aid to Ukraine because Trump wanted a probe into DNC hacking. So this is no longer about Hunter Biden. And you know something? The president has the right to stop signing checks. They stop signing all those checks to Israel. I really do here. Apparently, U.S. diplomats were pulled off a train in Russia, and Russia is saying it was for their safety because the train was in the area where they had that horrible accident with this experimental nuclear propulsion system that apparently has contaminated quite a large area. And Nancy Pelosi is out there saying that the voters are not going to decide on Trump's impeachment. It's none of your business. We're in charge. We're running the country. No, actually, one of our earlier callers hit it right on the head. They're supposed to represent us. And if the American voters are souring on the idea of impeachment, and the polls show that they are, Pelosi needs to listen. She's not the president. She's Speaker of the House. She's not, certainly not God. Okay. Apparently the IMF is now admitting that some of their policies are leading the world to the edge of disaster. And it really is. And again, it all gets back to the fraud of private central banking, where privately owned banks are allowed to literally create money out of thin air. There's nothing backing it up. Not since Nixon ended gold convertibility. It's funny money. It's counterfeit. It's legalized counterfeiting. And they're able to basically just create all this money, and then they loan it into circulation at interest. Now, you, of course, are not allowed to print up your own money with which to repay the loan and the interest. Because of that simple little mechanism, there's always going to be more debt than there is money to pay that debt. In fact, somebody just sent me this link to this debt clock about how fast it's climbing. And now we're finding out that the Federal Reserve, in order to buy back all these U.S. Treasuries bonds that everybody's dumping, they're spending as much money to do that as the military budget. We're talking $600-700 million. Sorry, billion. Apparently, a Russian senator interviewed on Sputnik International responded to Trump's letter to Erdogan, the one that Erdogan threw in the trash, and said, final straw here, and saying, you know, this Russian senator says the U.S. can't handle its own problems, let alone global ones. And he's absolutely right. The more we get into this, I mean, our country is falling apart. It's like Peter in Los Angeles will say, you know, the water is unreliable. Got all these illegal immigrants who are being used to change the demographics. We can't fix the infrastructure. All we can do is stick our politicians' nose and our military into other people's business where it doesn't belong. And these other countries, they don't hate us for our freedoms, like George W. Bush tried to sell us that. Talk about a whopper. Got 4 Pinocchios for that one. The United States is hated around the world because of its habit of going into other people's countries, messing around with the legitimate elected government, putting in puppet rulers, and then plundering the place. We're a pirate kingdom, just like Tripoli was once. Let's see. Everybody's still out there up in arms about the coming Halloween holiday and forbidden costumes. Meanwhile, there's this clothing company called, I think it's Yandex, and I don't know how I got on their mailing list, but boy, are they putting out some real sexy stuff. Those of you who still think that looking sexy is a good thing here. Alrighty. I just got a very rude letter saying, you know, shut up about Mars. Dad, look, I'm proud of the work I did on that mission. And I think Dr. Levin deserves his day in the sunshine. If you read my article about Levin and Viking, it starts out with all the times in history the wrong people got credit for great inventions and discoveries. Again, because of politics and influence and money. So, I'm not shutting up about Mars, because it is a huge NASA cover-up, and I'm glad it's getting attention. Glad it's getting attention. Okay. Let's see. Caller is correct, Peter. California will never be Republican again. The Reagan days are long gone, never to return. With the pouring in of more illegals, it is theorized that white will be the minority in California by the year 2040. It's close to being that way already. In fact, this person says, yeah, it's going to happen sooner. Alrighty. So, apparently, Stephen Scalise is out there saying that after Pelosi and Schumer stormed out, the White House meeting on Syria went very well, that they got a lot accomplished here. Another email, this one from Steve Elkins, saying, Pelosi's word, what's that worth? Well, what's any member of Congress word worth? Keep getting examples year after year after year that they're just consummate liars. If they ever catch themselves telling the truth, they tell a lie to stay in practice. I remember an incident that happened when Bill Clinton was president. Claire and I were already living in Hawaii. And Bill Clinton had made this big deal about how Hillary had gotten him off the junk food, that he was eating healthy and taking good care of himself. And then somebody snapped a photo of him coming out of the McDonald's over in Kailua, I think it was. And it ran briefly in the paper, and then that went away as well here. Okay. get this here. Anyway, we could use some phone calls, guys, to finish out the show. 800-313-9443. And oh, we've got a caller. My mistake. Billy in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Billy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I watch you all the time, and I haven't called in lately. But I just wanted to make a point about the border. You're one of the smartest guys I see as far as the, as they would call us, the underground movement, you know what I mean? Like Peter in Los Angeles, Dustin in New Jersey, hats off to all those guys. I've been asking some of my friends and your followers with some of the times that I call to try to get in touch with Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson and make waves about the question that I had the last time I called about why wasn't Eisenhower cared enough about the country to close the border off and take care of a problem way back then, and Donald Trump has the same amount of power, if not more so now than he had then. Yes, sir. And the problem is a lot worse. So my biggest disappointment with all the other things that I agree with your listeners is that I was a big Trump supporter when he first came down the escalator because of the things he said. But as soon as I found that information, I just stumbled upon it. But it was like he could have took care of this problem when he first got elected through an executive order, for God's sake. He doesn't have to dance around with this big clown show with the Republicans and the Democrats. And my question to you is yourself, because I know how intelligent you are and a lot of your listeners. I really admire a lot of people that call in and yourself as well. I had a little math quiz for you.
Yes.
The math quiz is the amount of illegal immigrants that are here now. Take that number and add another 5 or 10 million to it, and then do some research and see, not exactly, but a ballpark of how many illegal immigrants are coming over here on a monthly basis. And take that
Billy,
number.
I got to put you on hold. Billy, stay on the line. I'm going to put you on hold. We got to take a commercial break. I'll come right back to you as soon as we have these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And yes, RBN and whatreallyhappened.com, we do need your assistance because there's literally right now a war between the government and the people of the United States of America over who's going to control the truth. And we need your help. We really do. Okay, so we're talking with Billy in Pennsylvania. We're talking about the open borders issue. And to back up here a little bit historically, when Eisenhower ran his Operation Wetback, which of course the liberals would be screaming, racism, racism, if anybody tried to use a name like that today, he had about 1/10 the resources that Trump has. And you're absolutely right. Trump, Trump needs to enforce the laws. He's got his whole Department of Justice over there, and all these people helping these illegal immigrants, they're all in violation of Title VIII. And we're talking serious jail time in some cases. Okay? But there was this study done recently. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. You finish.
Well, there was this recent study that was done by Harvard and Yale, and they came up with an estimate that across the entire United States of America right now, there is something like 25 to 27 million illegal immigrants that are just a strain on our system. And it's just utterly absurd. Eisenhower was basically able to shut down the border by simply shutting it down. And anybody who was caught coming over the Rio Grande or everything, they just throw them back. There wasn't all this nonsense about, well, you've got to have a hearing and, you can claim asylum because conditions in your country are really, really bad and we're sorry we overthrew your elected government and imposed this foreign puppet rule. But we did it for our corporations and then that makes it all okay. But yeah, I mean, especially under the influence of the liberal Democrats, the immigration system has just been turned into this joke. And they're out there openly saying, everybody has a right to come to this country. No, you don't. I mean, you have a right to come to this country if you're going to obey the laws. You don't have a right to be a U.S. citizen just by stepping across the border. And yet that seems to be the attitude of the open borders people.
It's so weird that you just, as I was listening to your program when I was on hold, when you said about, the 2040 predicament, to me, like I was saying before the commercial, if, you yourself or your listeners really do the math and take that, 25 million illegal immigrants that are here now, and take that number and put it on the left side of the paper, and then do some research and see exactly, or a ballpark of what's coming in every month, and then take that number and multiply it by 12, and then take that number, which is a year, and multiply it by 10, it's game over. And all this back and forth clown show with the liberals and the Republicans and the Democrats or the communists, whatever you want to call them, it's not going to matter anymore, because then it's game over. It's game over.
I'm in agreement with you between the cost of the illegal immigrants and the cost of the wars. We're heading toward an obvious collapse of the system. And it's all due to the very short-sighted politics and policies that we have seen, especially coming out of the Democratic side of Congress. And the Republicans are not without fault on their own part as well. They really did forget what their job is supposed to be, which is representatives of the American people, not of the big corporate donors, not of the bankers, and certainly not of Israel. I think it was Abraham Lincoln who said that the United States will never be conquered from without. It'll have to destroy itself from within, which is what we're in the process of doing right now.
Yeah, I don't think they forgot their duties. I think they just don't care, because the corruption, the level, like Peter says in Los Angeles, the level of corruption is so off the hook. I mean, it's just, and it started when they killed Kennedy. Right after that, that's when it was really, that was their signature to their statement to say, this is what's going on. We're in charge, and everything else that happened after that. And when you do those numbers and see how many of them, and it really ain't about exterminating white people. It's all the patriots that believe in our way of life. God bless the whites. God bless the blacks. God bless the Hispanics who believe in our way of life. And all of us should get together and put a stop to this crap, man. We ought to all get together, and like the black people did a 1 million man march, we ought to do a 10 million man march and go to D.C. and put a stop to this crap and close the border off. I mean, it's ridiculous, boss. It's ridiculous. Everybody should get together and stop being divided. We are Americans. We're not black. We're not white. We're not Hispanic. We're all Americans, and we gotta come together as one and stop these tyrants. They're just tyrants. They want to destroy us.
That's a very important message that must get out there. We are a single American people. We have a country, and we have to take care of it, because obviously our various governments don't. They're not taking care of the place. It's falling apart. All right. Thank you for the phone call. Yeah. We're going to take another break for commercials here, and we could use more callers. 800-313-9443. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Israel, of course, or at least their government, has to be happy they found another camp guard, Nazi camp guard. Guy's 95 years old, and they're putting him on trial, and nobody really knows if he did anything. It's always guilt by acclamation. And of course, Israel dreads the day when they can't find any more Nazis to put on trial so that they can say Holocaust and Nazis and all the rest of it all over the news here. But they got one now. Serves them right if he dies before they're able to complete the trial. And apparently, I was right to be a little concerned about Mike Pence's news conference earlier regarding Syria and Turkey, because the story has already started to mutate. And the story now is Pence is saying Turkey has agreed to pause their military operations to give the Kurds time to leave. And of course, no comment from the Kurds whether they have any intention of leaving. You know, they want that strip of land. Now, the last deal that we heard was in the works was with Putin and Assad and Erdogan all agreeing to let the Kurds have this thin strip of land, for, you know, their Kurdistan. And so I really think Mike Pence's news conference was intended to try and bolster Trump's image. He really didn't say anything that had any meaning to it. And again, we know how much we get lied to about these things. So we're going to keep an eye on this story. And I'd like to see peace break out. You know, but contrary to what George W. Bush said in that idiotic statement of his, you know, American interventionism is not what is bringing peace to the world. It has brought war and bloodshed and death and suffering and destruction everywhere. And it does have to stop, because at some point somebody's going to say, okay, New World War is inevitable. We're actually in a slow motion World War right now. And they're going to start pushing the buttons, and things are going to get really ugly really fast. Speaking of ClimateGate, apparently there is a major nor'easter here in the United States that is threatening to create a phenomenon called the bomb cyclone, which is this massive, miles across, sudden downdraft that'll just bring all kinds of torrential rain. So if you're in New England, hunker down. Same thing, apparently, Louisiana is looking at an incoming tropical storm. We may get a little rain here on Saturday, according to the local forecaster here. One of the things I'm liking about Indiana are the critters. And yes, there was wildlife in Hawaii, but we hardly ever got to see it except for the feral cats and an occasional chicken. But it's just all over here. I was out back on the commercial break, and it was a huge bird overhead. And because I couldn't get my hands on the binoculars, I'm not sure what it was. But we do have brown eagles here. We have bald eagles here, turkey vultures, things like that. It's a huge nest in the tree over there. Springtime, I'm going to be curious as to find out what hatches out of that. Okay, well, apparently, back here, news icon disappeared. Apparently, our energy secretary is getting ready to resign from his position. And I would imagine with the oil industry in the trouble it seems to be in, now's a good time to get on out. In fact, I'll be very honest, I'm expecting to see a lot of resignations from Trump's White House. People, they don't want to be there when it all comes apart. You know, it's like being the cook on the Titanic. And he's asking the captain, are you sure the cook goes down with the ship? Anyway. I think the situation in Turkey and Syria is not going to improve, despite what Mike Pence said. I think that press conference was purely for show. One of the reasons I think it was purely for show is I was sent so many copies of it, which is generally a giveaway you're dealing with a propaganda campaign of some kind. But as I said before, the story has changed. Erdogan is going to pause the military action to give the Kurds time to leave. But obviously, if the Kurds do not leave, Turkey will start back up and risking war with Syria. And again, we still don't have Syria's reaction on any of this. Why are we even there? I mean, if you think about all the bovine excrement that we've been fed about why we're in all these countries. Oh, we're bringing them democracy. We're freeing them from an evil dictator. We're going to give them the benefits of the American way of life. Well, looking around here, I'm not sure that these other countries want the benefits of American life. They certainly don't want the crooked American elections. They don't like the crooked American politicians. And, of course, in the case of Syria, originally it was Assad is gassing his own people. He's a maniac. He's insane. He's using sarin gas on his own people. And we'd come on out and we'd say, why would he do that? Why would he do the one action that would justify U.S. military intervention? And I'm sure that the interventionists, like George W. Bush, they're still looking for a reason. How do we get back into Syria? We need a reason to sell to the American people that they have to send their children and more of their tax money over to Syria and have years more chaos like we brought to Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq and Yemen. We've trashed those places. And then the United States says, well, we're going to have a policy of reconstruction. Remember when they told us that Iraq's oil would pay for that war? That never happened. All righty, we have a caller on the line, and that's Steve in West Virginia. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I just got one thing for you. You're mentioning that you think it's going to come apart. I got to tell you, even though I don't believe that I'm going to vote for Trump this next time, I believe he's going to win, and it's a feeling I have in just watching everything, and I actually don't believe it's going to come apart. In fact, if you ever pay attention to the Las Vegas odds makers, they tell you there's only one entity dumber than the regular people, and that's the media. And you combine that with the regular people, and all of them are saying the same thing you are, it's likely to turn out just the opposite of what you think it's going to turn out to be.
Well, I have to be honest, I hope you're right. I don't want to see this country collapse. I don't want to see the American people go through, famine and runaway inflation. But, studying the history of other failed regimes, first of all, you need to remember, no nation, no government, no regime ever lasts forever. And actually, at over 200 years, the United States has had a really good run. But to me, the deterioration is obvious, not just in our political system and not just in the corruption, but just in the way our society is dissolving. It's lost its moral compass. We're being turned against each other. If you want to talk about a civil war in the streets of America, it's already starting to happen with like these Antifa thugs.
Yeah. Mike, think about it, though. This is the last thing, and I'll let you go.
Yeah.
If this thing does collapse, let's say, totally collapses, the Russians and the Chinese, they're not going to take up these goofy transgender. You can just tell by watching their society right now. I mean, I was in Europe for 35. They're not going to take up. They're not going to go for this transgender. They're not. So what's going to happen is they're going to beat the hell out of us. Not beat the hell out of us physically, but they're just going to pass us by because this country
exactly
is
what's going to happen. That's exactly what's going to happen.
Nonsense.
We are not going to be invaded by Russia and China or the rest of it. We've got too many problems here, and the Russians and the Chinese are going to say, look, they made this mess. They're going to have to sort it out for themselves.
Yeah, Mike, worrying about all the transgender and the global war, that's just going to put us way, way behind. It's not. I know some of the green people out there think the Green New Deal is actually going to put us ahead, but it's not. It's going to put us way, way behind.
It's going to bankrupt the nation.
Yes, yeah. Anyways, Mike, have a good show, and thank you. You're doing a fantastic job. You and Jeff.
Thank you very much
Jeff
for the
Lynch
kind
are the
words.
only ones I listen to now. Yep. Bye-bye.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to go to Ken in New York. Aloha, Ken. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I have a question about the reason Pence was sent. Wasn't he sent because Erdogan didn't want to deal with Pompeo?
Well, at one point, Erdogan said he wasn't going to talk to Pence, that the only one he would talk to would be Trump himself. And then Trump sent that stupid letter. So, I mean, in terms of international diplomacy, this thing has been a flustercluck from beginning to end, which is why I just, my gut is telling me that Pence's press conference, it's not entirely on the up and up. And like I said, they're already changing the story.
And I think that, or rather to say, doesn't anyone think that they've been watching this tag team of Pompeo and Bolton for the last year or so? Why would anybody want to talk to them? They don't want to talk to the hamburger.
Well, they are the accredited representatives of the U.S. government, and again, under international diplomacy, when they come knocking on your door, generally they're invited in, unless relations are really going bad, which is certainly what has been happening with the United States and Turkey. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, the Senate is getting ready to pass a resolution calling for more sanctions on Turkey over their purchase of the S-400. And that's another reason to say this whole, Erdogan going for a ceasefire, and of course they've stopped using ceasefire. It's merely a pause. And
yes, I heard.
Yeah, there's something wanky about the story, and I'm waiting to hear what the Kurd reaction is and what Syria's reaction is.
Now, Turkey had an empire one time.
Yes.
I don't think they want to deal with the hamburger flippers anymore. They want to talk directly to the top, or what they think is the top. But that's all I have. Thank you, and good night.
All right, good night. And the phone lines are open again, 800-313-9443. I really do hope there's a way to turn this country around, and that has been my driving force. For what, a quarter of a century now I've been doing this. I mean, when Clintons wrecked my career in Hollywood, I was at that time strongly motivated by simple revenge. I've been wronged here. But through the years, the more I learn about what's going on within our government and world events, there's an obvious danger there. And, I mean, you've got financial experts already saying that the coming correction, depression, recession, whatever they're going to call it, is actually going to be a lot worse than the one of the 1930s. And I tend to agree. I love that phrase the IMF is using. The world is in a synchronized slowdown. It means everybody's going broke at the same time, and for the same reason, the private central banks and the out-of-control debt. Now, there are some economists out there who are saying that there is going to be time for a reset. The bankers over in the Netherlands are already talking about, restarting with a gold-backed currency. So the signs are obvious to a lot of people, and not just yours truly. And I say this because, you got to be prepared. Don't let yourself get caught off guard. I mean, a lot of the people who really got hurt, again, with the Depression of the 1930s, they ignored the warning signs. They believed the media and the newspapers, and, everything was just fine. I mean, you actually had one of the Wall Street titans just days before crash was in the media saying, anybody not bearish on America is going to go broke. Now's the time to buy stocks. And they were basically trying to stimulate ordinary people to buy stocks because they needed that money coming into the stock market, and ultimately it didn't work. So that you need to understand the corporate media's job, even all the way back in 1929, is to tell you what the government and the money junkies want you to think to get you to do what they want you to do. They're not there to inform you. They never have been. And of course, we have these recent scandals with CNN and the New York Times and Project Veritas to just let us know we have a very dishonest media. We're more lied to than any other people on the face of planet Earth. I mean, I look at the New York Times and CNN, they're worse than Pravda and Izvestia ever were. We're in a Stalin-esque news cycle. And you just need to keep that in mind. Now, once again, getting back to the idea of being prepared, like it or not, We've had a very rough winter. We're going into another one. And there are likely to be serious food shortages. I've gotten emails from people saying, you know, food prices are already starting to skyrocket. And you may want to think about investing in one of those chest freezers, put in your garage, put a lock on it. Because when the food starts running out, people are going to just start stealing from each other. So, got a strange sound in the room here. So you need to be prepared. You need to be prepared for a hard winter. You need to be prepared for a recession. And we're in some very, very tough times. We're heading into more tough times is what I'm trying to say here. And you need to take care of yourself because the government's not going to do it. The government's looking out for itself. I can't do it. I'm an old guy. And there's only so much room in this place that we rented. But you got to start looking at the available facts before your face, and you have to be making some adjustments. One of the biggest adjustments we all need to start making right now is we don't allow food to go to waste. You'd be surprised how much. I'm going to look that up as part of a story for tomorrow about how much food is just wasted in this country. All right, got to take a break for our final commercial, and we'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Hello, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today, and a quick reminder that Steve Elkins will be taking the microphone for John Stadmiller following this program, so you're going to want to tune into him and hear what he has to say. I think something that people need to keep in mind right now is how unreliable corporate media has become. I mean, totally, completely unreliable. I think ABC set the example here. They get caught with that bogus Kentucky footage and then immediately misquote Trump. And they think that's what they're supposed to do. And then you read all of this stuff, or you listen to all this stuff coming out on the Project Veritas tapes. Now, this isn't Project Veritas saying these people said this. They went on out and they got them on tape saying, yes, we are biased. We don't want to admit it, but yes, we're biased. And that other caller was right for that one person at CNN to just openly say, I would prefer it if Donald Trump were dead. You know, that's the story. And I think the Secret Service should, you know, talk to this guy. I mean, obviously, I don't agree with a lot of what Trump has done. And I'm joined by a lot of people who probably agree the same thing. But you don't go around trying to solve the problem, you know, with violence. And of course, I'm old enough to remember when Kennedy was assassinated, when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, when Martin Luther King was assassinated. I mean, the people who were trying to really help this country were just dropping like flies. There's always a convenient lone nut assassin to blame it all on. And if you have not already seen it, Oliver Stone did a wonderful film about the Kennedy assassination. It's incomplete. He left out some important details there. And of course, we now have Robert Kennedy Jr., who's gone public saying that Sirhan was part of the plot to kill his father, but the actual fatal gunshot to the back of the head came from somebody else, who he's now named. And corporate media has pretty much brushed that one under the rug as well. Right now, corporate media, all they're really good for is the weather report and the sports scores, and they're not even all that good on the weather reports. So, anyway, we're looking at a government that is literally not just at war with you and I, the American people. They're at war with each other. I'm looking through the headlines here where, you know, just the rancor and the unwillingness to seek a compromise and a balanced position is very, very, very obvious. And it really is tearing itself apart. And I'm sure that other countries around the world are looking at what's going on in Washington, D.C. and just saying, it's just a matter of time. They can't hold this together anymore. They can't make it work. That Russian senator is right. We can't even solve our own problems, let alone go anywhere else and say, we're going to solve your problem. These other countries are saying, you are the problem. You came in here, you overthrew our elected government, you put in a puppet ruler. You're the problem. The United States is the curse of the world. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. Stay tuned for Steve Elkins and the Stat Miller program. Please support our VN. Please support whatreallyhappened.com. Spread the word. We need to build our audience. We need more listeners. We need more readers. And we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.